Chief Okoro had always believed that a man's word was sacred, that trust was the lifeblood of leadership. He had ruled Amuaka village with this principle for many seasons, and under his care, his people prospered. But one fateful afternoon, his belief was tested in ways he could never have foreseen. Imagine a stranger walking into your village, promising you wealth beyond your wildest dreams. He holds out matches that spark like magic, powder that roars like thunder, and words that glitter brighter than gold. The chief trusted him. The elders agreed. But what came next did not bring riches. It shattered the village forever. Why would a stranger give so much for so little? How could simple gifts hold so much power? And what would happen when trust became the snare that trapped the entire village? The day Edward Harrington arrived, the sun was cruel and heavy, pressing its heat onto the red earth. Children ran laughing through the dusty square, women pounded yam with rhythmic strikes, and hunters sharpened spears in preparation for the evening hunt. Life was ordinary, unbroken, until Edward appeared at the edge of the village. He was tall, pale-skinned, dressed in stiff fabrics that clung to him unnaturally. He carried a wooden box and a leather bag, each step kicking up dust that followed him like a shadow. The villagers fell silent, one by one, as if a spell had gripped the air. Mothers drew children to their sides. Men straightened their backs and folded their arms. Elders leaned on their staffs, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. Chief Okoro stepped forward, his broad frame steady, his long gray beard moving in the wind. In his right hand he carried the staff of his ancestors, carved with symbols of wisdom and strength. He had seen many traders before, men who came with beads, salt and cloth, but never had he seen one so confident, so polished, so unsettling. Edward bowed slightly and introduced himself in broken but clear words. His voice carried the assurance of someone used to commanding attention. "I come as a friend. I bring wealth. I bring the future," he declared. When he opened his box, gasps of wonder spread through the crowd. With one flick, a match sparked to life, fire dancing on the tip of a small stick. Women shrieked, children squealed with delight, and men exchanged astonished glances. He poured a pinch of powder into a bowl and lit it. Thunder cracked, smoke billowed, and hearts raced. Finally, he lifted a mirror, holding it to the sun so that beams of light scattered over the villagers like falling stars. Faces lit up with amazement. But not all were enchanted. Elder Obi frowned deeply, shaking his head. "A man who gives so much for so little cannot be trusted," he muttered. Elder Nana, however, clapped his hands, eyes glowing. "This is not deceit, this is progress," he said eagerly. Among the crowd, Azu Okoro's nephew clenched his fists. His father had died years ago defending their land against outsiders, and the sight of this man stirred unease in him. Everyone else cheered, but Azu's heart whispered caution. The crowd looked to Chief Okoro. His people awaited his judgment. The gifts glittered, the people buzzed with excitement, and Edward smiled with quiet triumph. But in that moment, Okoro felt a chill beneath the blazing sun. He did not know it yet, but the choice before him would shape the fate of his people forever. Long before the pale stranger appeared, Chief Okoro had been the steady pillar of Amuaka village. He was not born into wealth but into responsibility. His father, the great Chief Anazi, had taught him that the strength of a leader was not measured by the size of his harvest or the number of his wives, but by the trust of his people. Okoro had carried this lesson from boyhood. As a child, he would sit by the fireside while Anazi told stories of betrayal, warning him that not every hand extended in friendship was clean. "My son," his father would say, tapping his staff into the earth, "the land is our breath. Once you give it away, you give away life itself." Those words, though heavy, became Okoro's shield. But as he grew older, he learned another truth. Sometimes a leader's heart longed to believe in change, even at the risk of being deceived. Okoro's rise to leadership had not been easy. When his father died, famine swept the land. The yam barns emptied, the streams ran shallow, and neighboring villages threatened war over scarce hunting grounds. It was Okoro's voice, calm yet firm, that held Amuaka together. He had convinced his people to share what little they had, to till the soil harder, to fish longer, to endure hunger for the sake of unity. Slowly, prosperity returned. That victory made the people trust him completely. To them, Okoro was more than chief. He was father, protector, and judge. But power carries weight. Every decision he made bore consequences, every judgment shaped the future. He had learned to balance tradition with survival, to listen to his elders, and to respect the voices of the youth. Still, in the quiet of night, doubt often visited him. He wondered if he was too cautious, too bound by the old ways in a world that was changing. It was in these quiet moments that his nephew, Azu, reminded him of the past. Azu, son of Okoro's late brother, had grown into a sharp-eyed young hunter. His father had been killed in a skirmish with outsiders who sought to seize farmland, leaving Okoro to raise him. Azu's grief had hardened into vigilance. He often reminded Okoro, "Uncle, strangers may smile but their eyes tell another story." Okoro valued the boy's instincts, but he also knew youth often mistook fear for wisdom. He wanted to believe the world beyond Amuaka was not only danger and deceit. Yet the memory of his father's words, "The land is our breath," never left him. This was the man who now faced Edward Harrington, the pale stranger with glittering promises. A leader shaped by famine and war, yet tempted by hope. The elders looked to him, the villagers placed their future in his hands. To trust or to doubt, that was the path before him. Okoro felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. His father had warned him. His nephew had reminded him. His people had trusted him. But still, the thought lingered, what if this stranger truly carried the future in his hands? And with that question came the most dangerous temptation of all. Long before Edward Harrington set foot in Amuaka, he had already learned the art of making promises he never intended to keep. Born into a modest family in a small English town, Edward grew up watching his father barter with words rather than coin. His father had been a trader, a man who survived not through honesty but through charm, offering neighbors tools he never delivered or debts he never repaid. Edward absorbed those lessons eagerly. Power did not lie in truth, it lay in persuasion. By his teenage years, Edward was restless. England's factories were swelling, streets filled with smoke and iron, but he hated the soot and grime of industry. He wanted adventure, fortune, and a way to stand above the countless others clawing for survival. When whispers spread about expeditions to Africa, where land stretched endlessly and resources waited to be seized, Edward saw opportunity dressed as destiny. He joined a merchant company under false pretenses, presenting himself as educated though he had little schooling. But what he lacked in knowledge, he made up for with silver-tongued speeches and a fearless willingness to exploit trust. He quickly realized that many African chiefs, though wise, were vulnerable to the lure of new objects. Mirrors that captured their faces, matches that conjured fire instantly and gunpowder that mimicked thunder. To Edward these were not gifts but bait. In the coastal towns where he first set foot, Edward had witnessed both resistance and surrender. Some chiefs rejected foreigners outright, remembering blood spilled by raiders. Others, desperate for advantage over rivals, accepted the strangers' goods and signed agreements they did not fully understand. Edward took note. Where greed or hope existed, trust could be bought. Where doubt remained, fear could be kindled. But Edward carried something deeper than greed, resentment. He despised the English elites who mocked him as a mere hustler, unworthy of true power. In Africa he saw a chance to reinvent himself, to become the man his homeland never allowed him to be. Every promise he made was not just to trick villagers but to carve his name into a legacy of conquest. On the ship that carried him inland, Edward rehearsed his lines like an actor preparing for a play. I bring you wealth. I bring you the future. Simple words, heavy with falsehood, yet wrapped in the shine of his strange tools. He pictured the awe in villagers' eyes, the eagerness of chiefs to secure their people's future. He imagined their cheers, their gifts, their surrender. And with each wave the ship struck, his resolve hardened. Still, in the quiet of night, when the ocean roared louder than his ambitions, doubt sometimes whispered. What if they see through me? What if the land refuses me as England once did? He drowned those thoughts in rum, convincing himself that boldness always defeated suspicion. So when Edward stepped into Amuaka with his box of matches, powder and mirrors, it was not by chance but by design. Every gesture, every word, every smile was part of a script he had mastered. The villagers saw a generous stranger. But behind his pale eyes burned something darker, a hunger not for trade but for dominion. And though he smiled like a friend, his heart whispered the same lesson his father had lived by. Promises were not meant to be kept, only to be used. The stranger's gifts had dazzled the village square, but when the dust of amazement settled, the true battle began, not with spears or fire but with words. That evening, as the crimson sun bled into the horizon, Chief Okoro summoned the council of elders to the Obi, the sacred hut where matters of destiny were decided. The air inside was heavy with the scent of burning palm oil lamps. Mats were laid in a circle, and the carved ancestral masks on the walls seemed to watch silently as the men took their places. At the center sat Chief Okoro, his staff of authority resting across his knees. Beside him, young Azu crouched near the doorway, listening intently though he had no right to speak. Elder Obi, the oldest among them, was the first to break the silence. His voice cracked like dry wood. "I have seen many seasons and I know one truth. A man who offers much for little carries a hidden knife. This pale stranger dazzles us with tricks, but we must not be blinded. Our fathers warned us that land given away never returns." Several elders nodded in agreement, their eyes shadowed with caution. But Elder Nana, strong-voiced and ambitious, rose to his feet. His wrapper was tied tightly, his eyes burning with excitement. "Obi, your wisdom is old, but it binds us to the past. Look at what this man brings. Fire in a stick, thunder in a bowl, glass that shows your very face. These are not mere trinkets, they are power. With such things our village will rise above our rivals. Shall we cling to yam barns and spears while the world moves forward?" A murmur rippled through the hut. Some elders shifted uncomfortably, others tapped their staffs in agreement. The contrast between fear and fascination divided the circle like a river. Chief Okoro listened, his face unreadable, but in his heart a storm raged. Obi's warnings echoed his father's voice, "The land is our breath." Yet Nana's argument stirred another thought. Was he dooming his people to stagnation by rejecting progress? He could almost hear his people whispering in the village square, "Our chief denied us wealth. Our chief fears change." Azu could no longer hold his tongue. "Uncle, forgive me," he said, stepping forward boldly. "This man is no friend. My father died because strangers brought gifts and demanded land. Do not let history repeat itself. These things he shows us, are they not only tools? Tools wear out, but the land remains forever." The elders murmured at the youth's courage. Some admired his boldness, others scowled at his insolence. Elder Nana scoffed. "A boy speaks of history as if he has seen the world. Let him hunt antelopes, let men decide the future." The room grew tense. Chief Okoro lifted his staff, commanding silence. His eyes swept over his council, the wary, the eager, the divided. He felt the pull of two worlds, tradition rooted in caution, and the dazzling promise of a stranger's future. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with weariness. "We will not decide in haste. The land of our ancestors is not a calabash to be given away for wine. But neither shall we close our ears to what the world brings. Tomorrow I will meet this Edward again. Then we shall know whether he seeks friendship, or our soul." The elders bowed in reluctant agreement. But as they dispersed, the division remained, like cracks spreading unseen through a clay pot. And outside the hut, under the rising moon, Edward Harrington smiled to himself. He knew the seed of division had already taken root. The next morning, the village square was alive with a mixture of excitement and unease. Sunlight glinted off Edward Harrington's pale skin as he walked among the villagers, his box of matches, powder and mirrors under one arm, a leather satchel slung across his shoulder. Children pressed forward to see the sparks and thunders once more, while elders exchanged cautious glances. Chief Okoro approached, his staff in hand, the weight of responsibility heavy upon him. Edward bowed slightly, a polished smile playing on his lips. "Chief Okoro, your people honor me with their attention. I bring not only gifts but promises of wealth and progress. I ask only for a small measure of land and willing hands to help shape the future." His voice was smooth, every word carefully measured to entice, to charm and to conceal. Okoro's heart pounded. He remembered his father's warning, "The land is our breath. Once given, it cannot return." Yet he also saw the hope shimmering in his people's eyes, the children reaching for sparks, the young men intrigued by tools unlike any they had seen, the elders whose curiosity sometimes outshone their caution. Could progress arrive through this stranger, or was it a trap waiting to be sprung? Elder Obi stepped forward, voice firm, trembling with age and conviction. "Chief, we have seen men like him before. They offer trinkets and dreams but take all that is ours. Give him nothing. Protect the land. Protect your people." Elder Nana, on the other hand, raised his hand and spoke loudly, passion blazing in his eyes. "We cannot let fear bind us to yesterday. This man has the means to elevate Imuaka beyond any neighboring village. Do we cling to yams and tradition while the world passes us by?" Azu, standing slightly behind his uncle, clenched his fists. "Uncle, do not forget why our fathers died. Strangers may bring fire and powder, but promises are often poisoned. Do not let our people pay for your hope." Chief Okoro closed his eyes briefly, inhaling the dusty air. The arguments of past and future clashed violently in his mind. He knew that rejecting Edward could stall the village's growth, but accepting could cost everything. His people waited, their eyes pleading for guidance. Finally, after a pause heavy with tension, Okoro spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "Edward Harrington, we will place our trust in your hands, for now. We offer you a small portion of our fertile land, and those who are willing may assist you in your work. But understand this, our people and their dignity are not yours to take." Edward's lips curved into a smile broader than before. "Chief, your wisdom honors me. I shall bring prosperity beyond your imagining." He gestured to his box, and once again the matches sparked, powder roared, and mirrors gleamed like captured sunlight. The villagers erupted in cheers, many clapping their hands, others laughing with excitement. Children ran with the matches, women peered into mirrors, and men eagerly discussed what they might build and harvest. For a moment, Umuaka felt as though it had stepped into a new age. But as Edward collected the small portion of land and noted which young men would assist him, a shadow fell over Okoro's heart. He could see the glimmer in Edward's eyes, not of generosity but calculation. And deep inside, Azu's warning echoed relentlessly. History repeats itself for those who ignore its lessons. The celebration masked an uneasy truth. While the village danced and laughed, seeds of discord and betrayal had already been sown. The die was cast. For the first time in many moons, the village of Umuaka seemed alive with pure delight. Children raced through the dusty square, waving the tiny matches that sparked fire at their fingertips. Smoke curled into the sky as small fires popped safely under careful supervision, and the crackling sound filled the air like music. Women leaned over mirrors Edward had given them, marveling at their reflections in ways they had never imagined. Even the elders, though cautious, allowed themselves a smile. Chief Okoro watched quietly, his staff resting across his knees, a mixture of pride and unease tugging at his heart. For days, he had carried the weight of decision and the murmur of doubt from Elder Obi. Yet seeing his people laugh and marvel at the stranger's gifts, he allowed himself a rare moment of hope. Perhaps Edward truly would deliver prosperity. Perhaps the land and the hands offered were not lost, but transformed into tools for greatness. Young men, including some of the chief's nephews, eagerly assisted Edward in arranging his small workshop at the edge of the village. They carried powder, stacked the mirrors in the sun, and experimented with the matches. The thrill of creation surged through their veins, and they chattered about what they might build. Granaries, simple carts, even rudimentary tools that could ease their labor. Azu, however, lingered on the periphery, his hands clenched at his sides. He had watched the joy around him, but his mind raced faster than the children's feet. He remembered the stories of his father, who had died protecting Umuaka from outsiders who came bearing promises they could not keep. And though the smoke from the matches twirled into the sky like joyful ribbons, to Azu it seemed more like the tendrils of a coming storm. Meanwhile, Edward moved among the villagers, smiling, giving small advice, and demonstrating his tools with precise, practiced gestures. His charm seemed infinite, his patience flawless. But there was a subtle glint in his eyes, a spark that did not match the innocence of the children. He seemed to enjoy not only their amazement, but their unquestioning trust. Even the elders could not hide their fascination. Elder Nana boasted openly, "See, Obi? I told you this stranger brings power. Look how our people thrive with his gifts." But Elder Obi's frown remained, deeper now than ever. He whispered, "Power may come in fire and mirrors, but what burns can also destroy. Watch closely, for this joy may be the veil of disaster." As the sun dipped behind the distant hills, the village celebrated with a small feast, laughter echoing through the night. Matches flickered, powder crackled faintly in prepared demonstrations, and the mirrors caught the fading light like scattered stars. For a moment, it felt as if time itself had paused in approval of their happiness. But beneath the cheer, subtle cracks were forming. Some young men returned late from Edward's workshop, exhausted and silent, while whispers of strange instructions and demands began to circulate. Chief Okoro noticed it, his gaze meeting Azu's warning eyes. The joy was real but fragile. And even as the village reveled, the shadow of betrayal crept closer, like smoke curling toward the fire's edge, unnoticed until it was too late. The seeds of hope had been sown, but so too had the seeds of ruin. Weeks had passed since Edward Harrington first arrived in Umuaka. The initial excitement of the villagers had begun to settle into routine. Children still played with matches, women still admired their reflections, and young men assisted Edward with his strange projects. But the spark of joy was dimming under the shadow of growing unease. Edward returned one bright morning, his polished boots clicking against the dusty ground, a sharp gleam in his eyes. The villagers gathered instinctively, curiosity blending with apprehension. This time he brought not gifts but expectations. "Chief Okoro," he began, voice smooth as ever, "the work we started requires more hands and more land. Your young men are talented, but we need greater numbers. And the fertile fields at the edge of your village would be more useful under my guidance." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked to Chief Okoro, expecting him to reject the stranger's bold request. Others exchanged uneasy glances, their thoughts torn between obedience to their chief and the lure of continued prosperity. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Chief Okoro's jaw tightened. He recalled the warnings of Elder Obi and the cautious eyes of his nephew Azu. Yet he also remembered the villagers' happiness, their hope for progress. But the truth was undeniable. Edward's demands were growing, and with each demand, a piece of Amuaka's soul seemed at risk. Azu stepped forward, anger burning in his chest. "Uncle, we were promised tools to help our people, not chains to bind us. This man asks for more than he gave. What he calls progress, he calls control." His voice trembled but carried authority beyond his years. Edward's smile remained, but it was sharper now, almost predatory. "Azu, your youth blinds you. True advancement requires sacrifice. Your people will benefit from my guidance, but only if they work alongside me. Land is meant to be used wisely, and those who assist me will see fortune beyond imagination." Some villagers nodded, caught between fear and desire. They remembered the joy of matches that sparked like magic and powder that roared like thunder. They remembered glimpses of themselves in mirrors that reflected possibilities they had never dreamed. Yet a quiet, gnawing doubt began to spread. That afternoon, young men were selected to assist Edward in his projects. They carried tools into the open fields under his careful instruction, their backs bent in labor, their hands blistered from unfamiliar work. Families waved goodbye with hopeful smiles, unaware that some of these young men would not return home for weeks, and some might never return at all. Chief Okoro watched silently from a distance, his staff resting against his shoulder. Each step Edward took across the fertile land seemed to mark a small victory, not for the village but for the stranger. The promise of riches had begun to twist into obligation, and the people were caught in the snare of trust misplaced. Even Elder Obi's frown deepened. "This is no longer a gift," he whispered to Okoro. "It is a claim. And claims, once made, are hard to undo." The sun sank low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields. The village had begun to unravel quietly, almost imperceptibly. The laughter that had once filled the air was punctuated by whispers of concern. And somewhere in the distance, Edward Harrington watched it all, smiling to himself, knowing the path of deception was now fully underway. By the following weeks, the village that had once celebrated Edward Harrington's arrival began to fracture. The same streets that echoed with children's laughter now carried murmurs of suspicion and unease. Families whispered about the increasing demands on their sons, and the fertile land that had once fed generations now bore the marks of Edward's experiments rather than crops. Inside the Obi, the elders gathered once more. Tension hung thick in the air like the smoke of unextinguished fires. Elder Obi's frown deepened, each line on his face like a carved warning from the past. "Chief Okoro," he said, his voice firm and trembling with frustration, "we are being fooled. The gifts were but a veil. The land we offered is slipping from our hands, and the young men, our future, are being taken further than they should." Elder Nana, eyes blazing, rose to his feet. "Obi, do not speak as if hope is a crime. Edward brings opportunity. He brings knowledge, tools, progress. Are we to reject the world because it does not come wrapped in tradition?" Chief Okoro's gaze shifted from one elder to the other, weighing their words, feeling the strain of division pressing on his shoulders. He understood both perspectives, the fear of betrayal and the desire for advancement, but he also knew that indecision now could destroy what little trust remained among his people. Azu, standing near the doorway, clenched his fists. He had watched friends leave with Edward and return exhausted, their faces pale, their voices quiet. "This is not progress," he shouted. "This is control. You asked the village to trust you, uncle, and we are losing everything. Edward does not give, he takes. And soon we will have nothing left." Some elders nodded in agreement with Azu, while others murmured in anger at his boldness. Voices began to rise, accusations spilling like water over the edge of a broken dam. Some blamed Chief Okoro for trusting Edward, calling him naive or blind. Others defended the chief, arguing that rejection of the stranger might have cost them opportunities to advance. Outside the hut, villagers gathered, hearing snippets of the elders' heated debate. Families divided, some supporting Edward's promise, others fearing the loss of land and sons. Whispers of betrayal traveled quickly, carried by the wind through narrow alleyways and across the open square. A young mother pulled her children close, her eyes scanning the horizon where Edward worked with the young men, realizing that the man they had cheered for now held power over more than just tools and powder. Edward, unaware of the subtle storm brewing behind him, moved with precision among the villagers, encouraging labor, praising compliance, and smiling with that same predatory calm. He knew that a divided village would be easier to control than one united. Chief Okoro, standing in silence, felt the crushing weight of responsibility. His people, once harmonious and trusting, were now caught between loyalty, fear, and hope. And though he had acted in good faith, he could not deny the truth forming like a shadow across the land. The village's unity was breaking, and with it, the foundations of trust that had held Umuaka together for generations. The sun sank behind the hills, casting the village in long, fractured shadows. What had begun as wonder now teetered on the edge of chaos. And in that fading light, the first real taste of betrayal began to stir among the people, unseen but inevitable. The harvest that had once sustained Umuaka now lay half-empty, trampled by the stranger's ambitions. Crops were sparse, and the fields Edward had claimed were no longer producing for the villagers. Families went hungry while young men labored under Edward's direction, returning late, exhausted and silent. The laughter that once filled the square was gone, replaced by whispers of despair and suspicion. Chief Okoro stood on the veranda of his hut, watching the sun dip behind the distant hills. The weight of leadership pressed heavily upon him, heavier than any tool he had ever carried. He thought of the promises Edward had made, the gifts that had dazzled the people, and the subtle smile that now revealed itself as cunning rather than kindness. Each spark of the matches, each roar of powder, had been a lure, an illusion that had cost the village its freedom. Inside the village, divisions had grown into open confrontation. Elder Nana, once an advocate of Edward's promises, now argued furiously with Elder Obi. "We trusted him for the sake of the village's future," he shouted, voice cracking with anger. "And yet we lose our land, our youth, our dignity. Is this your wisdom, Obi? Or is it stubborn fear?" Obi's eyes glimmered with tears of frustration. "And what of trust?" he demanded. "We gave freely and see what has come of it. The people suffer because we ignored the lessons of history." Outside, Azu moved among the villagers, witnessing the physical and emotional toll. Mothers pressed emaciated children to their chests, fathers stared in despair at fields ruined by Edward's demands, and friends who had gone to assist the stranger now returned with hollow eyes. Azu's voice rose above the murmurs. "Do you see? Do you feel what has been taken? Edward promised riches, but he brought only hunger and grief. We cannot allow this to continue." Edward, ever composed, watched from the edge of the village. He counted the work done, the land seized, and the young men under his control. Each groan of the weary laborers and the silent grief of families only reinforced his power. He knew that the village's spirit was fraying. Division and desperation were tools as sharp as any sword. Chief Okoro finally stepped forward, raising his staff to call silence. The villagers, battered in body and spirit, gathered around him. His voice, though heavy with sorrow, carried authority. "My people," he said, "I led you with trust in my heart. I believed promises that should have been questioned, and I see now the cost. Edward Harrington came not as a friend but as a deceiver. We have been tested, and some of us have failed to recognize the danger in time." Tears glistened in many eyes. Some villagers bowed their heads in shame, others clenched fists in rage. Azu looked to his uncle, silently urging action, and Okoro nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth in his nephew's eyes. The sun finally vanished behind the horizon, leaving the village in a shadowed, uncertain night. Hunger gnawed at bellies, grief weighed upon hearts, and anger simmered beneath every whisper. Umuaka had been shaken to its core. Edward Harrington had taken more than land. He had taken trust, hope, and unity. And the villagers now understood the painful lesson that every leader fears. Some promises, no matter how dazzling, carry the weight of ruin. The village of Umuaka was quiet that morning, but the silence was heavy, filled with the weight of loss and reflection. The sun rose over fields partially claimed by Edward Harrington, the same fields that had once fed generations and now bore only the marks of labor misused. Children no longer played freely with matches, women no longer smiled at their mirrors, and the elders, once divided by hope and fear, now stood solemnly beside Chief Okoro. Okoro's eyes scanned the gathering crowd, weary but steady. His staff, carved with ancestral symbols, rested in his hands, a reminder of the wisdom and responsibility passed down through generations. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate, carrying the gravity of lessons learned the hardest way. "My people," he began, voice calm yet heavy, "we were offered a promise that glittered like gold, that sparkled like fire and roared like thunder. And we believed it." He paused, letting the murmurs of the villagers settle into attentive silence. But what seemed like fortune was, in truth, a test. We placed our trust in a man who valued only what he could take, not what he could give. And for that, we have suffered. Azu, standing near his uncle, felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The young man had warned against Edward from the start, yet even Okoro's authority had been swayed by desire for prosperity. Now the village faced the bitter truth. The cost of misplaced trust could not be measured in tools or powder. It was counted in broken fields, exhausted youth, and shattered hearts. Okoro lifted his gaze to the elders. "We must remember this day not as one of shame but as a lesson. Trust is sacred, yes, but it must be earned. Promises that dazzle the eye may hide poison for the soul. We will rebuild, not by chasing false riches, but by cherishing the land, our people, and the wisdom of those who came before us." A slow murmur of agreement rippled through the villagers. Elder Obi nodded, finally satisfied that his warnings had been heard. Elder Nana bowed his head, chastened, realizing that hope without caution had nearly destroyed the village. Even Edward Harrington, standing at the edge of the village, observed quietly. The spark of arrogance remained in his eyes, but for the first time, he saw the resolve in a people who would not be broken completely. They were bruised, yes, but still alive, still capable of unity and resistance. Okoro turned to the villagers and raised his staff one last time. "We have been tested," he said, "and some of us learned the hard way. But we will endure. We will teach our children that gold can glitter, but wisdom shines brighter. We will teach them that fire can burn, but vigilance protects. And we will teach them that unity is stronger than any stranger's promise." The villagers, some teary-eyed, others solemn but determined, slowly dispersed to their homes. Children peeked from doorways, learning that lessons could be harsh but necessary. The land remained wounded but alive, and the people of Amuaka, though shaken, began the slow process of healing. As the sun climbed higher, Okoro looked toward the horizon, a mixture of grief and hope in his heart. Edward Harrington had tried to shatter the village, but the spirit of Amuaka had survived. And that spirit, he knew, was the true wealth that no stranger could ever steal. The village had been broken, but its lesson was forever clear. Trust wisely, act carefully, and never forget the value of your own people.